Welcome back to Midnight How, and this is the Ghostly Hour. In this series, we're gonna dig deep into our records. Here in the KG8, we keep records of everything we've ever done, every situation we ever come across, and you know what? We even keep records of stuff that you've been through. And in this series, we're gonna go through those records. And since I was just in the Grand Canyon, we're gonna start off this series with some Grand Canyon scary stories. So get your popcorn ready, stay tuned, and we're gonna get going. But before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and you leave a comment down below so we can give a shout out to you like these people right here on the screen. They're always leaving comments, they're always leaving likes, and they're always sharing our videos. And make sure you guys do the same. Anyways, without further ado, let's get started with our first story. Like I said, the story takes place in the Grand Canyon, and it's called The Ghost of El Tovar.
The Ghost of El Tovar. It was a crisp autumn evening when I found myself at the Grand Canyon, staying at the historic El Tovar Hotel. The place had an air of old world charm, with its dark wood interiors and rustic decor. But there was something else, something almost otherworldly that hung in the atmosphere, a weight that pressed down as if the very walls held secrets. As I checked in, the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, noticed the curious expressions on my face. "First time at the El Tovar?" she asked with a smile. "Yes," I replied, glancing around Grand Lobby. "It's beautiful. There's a lot of history here, isn't there?" She nodded, her smile fading slightly. "Oh yes, a lot of history, and a few stories too. If you're interested, some of the locals and staffs have quite a few tales to tell." I chuckled, trying to mask my intrigue. "I've heard whispers about a ghost. Is that true?" Her expression grew serious, and she leaned in slightly. "Many say it's just a legend, but others, well, that's just some of our guests have had experiences that are hard to explain." The conversation left a lingering sense of curiosity as I made my way to my room. After a long day of exploring the canyon, I retired to my quarters, ready for a good night's rest. The hotel was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels thick, almost oppressive, as if the silence was swallowing the noise. I had just turned off the lights when I heard a faint, sorrowful humming, like an old lullaby. It wasn't this kind of sound you've expected in a place like this, and it made the hair on the back of my neck stand. I froze, straining my ears to locate the source. It seemed to come from somewhere and nowhere at once. The sound was haunting, an echo of sadness that seeped through the walls. Curiosity and a hint of unease now ground at me. So I got up, wrapping a blanket around myself, and quietly opened the door to the hallway. The humming grew louder and guiding me down the corridor. The hotel was eerily deserted, not a soul in sight, but the sound persisted, drawing me closer. As I approached the grand stairs, I saw her. At first, she was just a shadow, barely visible in the dim of light. But as I descended the stairs, her figure became clear. She was standing by the window, looking out the canyon. Her back to me, she wore a long flowing dress, while as moonlight, and her hair was piled atop her head in an old-fashioned style. I should have been terrified, but there was a sadness about her that pulled me in. I hesitated, not wanting to startle her or whatever she was, but something compelled me to speak. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge my presence at all, but the humming stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I took a step closer. That's when she turned to face me. Her eyes, they were deep, dark pools of sorrow, but there was also something in them, something that seemed to reach out to me, pleading. Her lips moved as if she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. I could feel a chill in the air. The temperature dropped around me, and suddenly, I knew who she was. This was the ghost of El Tovar, the woman who had once been a guest at this hotel back in the 1900s. The story goes that she was a bride on her honeymoon, but her husband had gone missing during their stay. Some say he fell into the canyon. Others believe he abandoned her. Heartbroken, she spent days wandering the hotel, waiting for him to return, until one day she simply vanished, but her spirit never left.
You guys, welcome back, and tell me that is not a crazy story that happened in the Grand Canyon. It's a true story. It's written here in the books. It's written here in the books, and I tell you what, are you ready for the next one? Because the next one is even crazier. It's about this girl named I'm not gonna tell you just yet. The name of this story is called The Whispers of the Canyon.
The Cave of the Lost Time. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the jagged cliffs of the Grand Canyon. A group of 5 hikers, led by an experienced guide named Tom, was making their way down their steep trail on the backs of the sturdy donkeys. The group was an electric mix: Emma, an adventurous photographer; Jack, a history enthusiast; Sarah, a geologist; Mike, a thrill seeker; and Lucy, a quiet artist who rarely spoke about but observed everything around her. As they wound their way deeper into the canyon, the group noticed a dark opening hidden behind a cluster of boulders. It was a cave, barely visible unless you were looking for it. The guide, Tom, who was traversed these trails countless times, had never noticed it before. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to investigate. The entrance to the cave was narrow, forcing them to dismount and leave the donkeys behind. The air inside was cool and damp, a welcome relief from the scorching heat outside. As they ventured deeper, the walls of the cave began to widen, revealing a vast chamber illuminated by shafts of light that filtered through cracks in the ceiling. Oh, it's illuminated. Sorry. It was then that they saw them. Artifacts from every corner of the globe. An ancient Egyptian statue. Grecian urns, Chinese scrolls, and Viking swords were scattered across the chamber, each piece more exquisite and mysterious than the last. The group was in awe, their voices echoing as they marveled at the treasure trove before them. "This is impossible," Jack whispered, running his fingers over a dusty scroll. "These artifacts shouldn't be here." They're from different times, different places. Maybe is it a hex? Mike suggested, through the voice betrayed unease. Lucy, who had been silent, finally spoke. No, this isn't a hoax. This is real, but something about this place feels wrong. As they explored further, the air grew heavier, the light dimmer. The cave seemed to pulse with a life of its own. An ancient, malevolent energy that none of them could explain. They decided to leave, but as they turned to retrace their steps, they realized that the entrance had vanished. The cave had sealed them inside. Panic set in as the group searched frantically for another way out. The walls seemed to shift and move, confusing their sense of direction. Then, one by one, they began to disappear. First Sarah. She went missing, her flashlight abandoned on the ground where she stood just moments before. Then Jack, who had ventured ahead, was gone in the blink of an eye, leaving only his echoing screams behind. Mike, who had tried to break through the cave walls, vanished in a flash of light. Emma and Tom were the only ones left. They clung to each other, their fear palpable as they stumbled through the dark, the walls closing in on them. Suddenly, Tom was yanked away from an unseen force. His terrified shout cut short. Emma was alone. Heart pounding, Emma raced through the caves, the artifacts now a blur of shadows and shapes. She could feel something pursuing her, something ancient and very powerful. Something that had been protecting the cave and its treasures for centuries. Her mind raced, trying to find a way out, but every tunnel, every path led to a dead end. Just when she thought all hope was lost, she spotted a faint light ahead. With the last of her strength, she sprinted towards it, the ground beneath her feet crumbling as the cave began to collapse. She reached the light, throwing herself through a narrow opening just as the cave behind her caved in. She stumbled out into the open, gasping for air, her body battered and bruised. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the canyon. The donkeys were still there, grazing peacefully as if nothing had happened. Emma staggered to her feet, her mind reeling from the ordeal. She was the only one left. The others were gone, swallowed by the cave and whatever had been guarding it. She looked back at the boulders. The cave entrance was gone, as it had never existed. With a heavy heart and a deep sense of dread, Emma climbed into her donkey and began the long journey back to the canyon, leaving the secret of the cave behind. But she knew, deep down, she would never truly leave it. The memories of what had happened would haunt her forever, a reminder of the ancient, the unseen forces still lingered in the world, waiting for the next unwary traveler to stumble upon them.
Oh my god, you guys, that was crazy, wasn't it? What would you do in her situation? Leave it in the comments. Exactly what would you do if you came across that whispering noise? Now tell me, guys, if you're ready to explore, get a couple of friends and go hiking the Grand Canyon, if you dare. But let me tell you something. You better be ready, because You better be ready, because let me tell you, the next story is gonna shiver down your spine. It's about a group of hikers and what they found somewhere lost in time. The next story is called The Cave of Lost Time.
The Whispering Shadows of the Canyon. It was a late summer evening when Emily, a passionate hiker, an amateur photographer, decided to camp in a less traveled area of the Grand Canyon. She had been exploring the canyon for days, capturing the stunning vistas with her camera. But on the particular evening, she was drawn to a secluded spot known only to a few, the place where the canyon walls seemed to close in, creating an almost claustrophobic atmosphere. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, Emily set her tent near an ancient Native American ruin, a site discovered earlier that day. The ruin was nothing more than a few crumbled stones, but something about it fascinated her. The air around it felt thick, almost as it held the weight of centuries of history. After a quick meal, Emily settled into her tent, the silence of a canyon wrapping around her like a blanket. She was about to drift off to sleep when she heard it, a faint whisper, like the wind carrying words in a language just couldn't understand. It was quiet that at first she thought it was just an imagination. But the whispers grew louder, and soon they were all around her. Emily sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. Ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. She grabbed her flashlight and shone it around the tent. But there was nothing, just an empty darkness of the canyon night. Trying to shake off the eerie feeling, she lay back down, telling herself it was just a wind. But the sleep wouldn't come. The whispers continue, sometimes soft, sometimes urgent, as they were trying to tell her something important, something she couldn't quite grasp. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. Emily unzipped her tent and stepped into the night. The moon was high, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. She turned her flashlight and walked toward the ruin. The source was her unease. As she approached the ruin, the whispers became clearer. There was no longer just sounds. There were voices, speaking to hushed tones. Emily sneaked, prickled with fear, but she couldn't turn back now. She had to know what was happening. She reached the ruin and stopped her flashlight, illuminating the ancient stones. The voice here, almost as if they were coming from the very ground beneath her. Emily fell down, her breath coming in short, shaking and grasping, and brushed away the dirt covering on her stones. What she uncovered made her blood run cold. Covered into the stone were symbols, ancient symbols she didn't recognize, but seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Her hands trembled as she traced the carving, the whispers growing from more frantic in years. And then, suddenly, they stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, a heavy, oppressive silence that made Emily's heart race even faster. She stood up, shining her flashlight around, but everything seemed normal. Too normal. Just as she was about to turn and run back to her tent, she felt it. Cold breath on the back of her neck. Emily froze, fear rooting her to the spot. Slowly, she turned around, her flashlight beaming, cutting through the darkness. There was standing just a feet away was a figure, a shadowy and distinct form that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. It had no face, no features, just a vague humanoid shape that radiant and overwhelming sense of malevolence. Ellen screamed, "Ah!" caught in her throat as the figure began to move forward her, its shadowy form gliding over the ground without making any sound. She stumbled backwards, her flashlight shaking in her hand, but the figure was relentless, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed, just as it reached her. Emily felt a sudden rush of wind, and the figure dissipated into the air, as if it had never been there at all. The whispers returned, but this time they were different. They were filled with anger and with rage, directed at her. In a blind panic, Emily turned and ran, her feet pounding against the rock. Around as she sprinted back to her tent, she couldn't feel the presence behind her chasing her, closing in on her. But no matter how fast she ran, it was always just a step behind. She reached her tent and dove inside, zipping up as quickly as she could. She grabbed her camera, thinking to use the flash as a weapon. But when she turned it on, the screen was filled with static. The camera, her lifeline canyon, was dead. The whispers were inside the tent, knowing, circling her, taunting her. Emily crawled into a ball, tears streaming down her face, and squeezed her eyes shut, praying for it to stop, for the morning to come, for the nightmare to end. But the night stretched on, endless and unforgiving. The whispers didn't stop, and the shadowy figure didn't leave. It stood just outside the tent, waiting, watching, as it had all the time in the world. When the sun finally rose, Emily was gone. Her tent stood alone in the canyon, empty, expected for her camera. Emily lay on the ground, its lanes shattered. The ruin was untouched, the ancient symbols uncovered once again by the shifting sand of time. But if you listen closely, you stand in the spot at dusk, you might hear them, the whispers of the canyon. They say that those who hear them are never again claimed by the ancient spirits that dwell within the shadows, forever lost to the canyon of the forever lost to the darkness of the Grand Canyon. And if you're not careful, you might be next.
Oh, you guys are back. That was crazy, right? Imagine you and your friends were exploring the Grand Canyon and you seep into this little crack, and then you see all these wonders from different times and places. It makes you wonder who was there, huh? It makes you wonder who kept all those secrets there, huh? It wasn't us. It's not like we time keep everything and we keep secrets. It's not like that's what our organization do or anything like that. It wasn't like they stumbled across our... Oh, wait. I don't think I should have shared that with you guys. Anyways, guys, that's pretty much wraps up the first series of our scary stories. We're going to, again, go into our books at least once a week so we can share more scary stories with you guys. Again, make sure you comment down below, tell us where you're from, and we can start investigating those places and start telling you more stories of those places where you're from. Until next time, but before you click out of this video, there's going to be 2 videos right up here. Make sure you click those links and watch more. Minahao, Keepers of the Grave.